we're going to study the different parts of the brain, but I hope, and what I want you to remember is they do their job just by generating action potential after action potential after action potential. That's what we had to study, how the nerves function. So this is just a collection of nerves, that's it. And the collection of nerves here have a special function. They have a job because there's so many stimuli that we respond to. And not only stimulus, but also effector organs. So we have skeletal muscle, then we have smooth muscle, right? We have your heart, we have your adipose tissue, we have glands. So there's a lot of effector organs, but there's only one brain, so they have all a special job to do. But in terms of what carries out that job, it's just the neuron. And how does the neuron carry out that job? It's just by generating action potential, okay? So before we start with the study of the brain and the spinal cord, let's see first the structures that protect your precious nervous tissue. We know it needs to be protected, right? Because they don't regenerate. If they get injured, the injury is permanent, right? And the one that's quick to take over are your astrocytes. In the CNS, we have astrocytes. And so if it gets injured, the astrocytes don't even give it any chance to try and recover. Fortunately, we have all these structures that protect it from damage. The one that's very obvious is your bone, right? Bone. So in the test, in case I ask, give me structures that protect your nervous tissue, CNS structures. If you wrote skull, number 1, number 2, vertebral column, that's just considered one. They're both bone. So in the brain, what protects it is your skull. The spinal cord is protected by your vertebral column, but they're both bone. Okay? So it's obvious that bone. Have you heard of meninges? Meninges are nothing but coverings, and when you open up the brain, you will see it's covered by meninges. It's like a candy wrapper. One of my favorite candies is the Lindt candy, and it's covered in wrapper, right? Like a Tootsie Roll. And so that's the function of the meninges. Let me see if I have a nice picture of meninges over here. I think this is the nicest one. So you will see. Let me go get it. This is what you will open up. After we open our hearts, the cats, we're going to open up the sheep brain. And just by looking at this, you see it's covered. You don't actually see the brain. It's covered by meninges. That's the wrapper. And the meninges is actually tough connective tissue. So when you go home and you eat your chicken or you eat your steak, you see that white fibrous tissue. That's the same composition as your meninges. And the meninges actually come in 3 layers, you see? It's not only one, but there's 3 of them. And the innermost layer, so from outer to inner. So dura mater is the one closest to the bone, you see, and then the middle is the arachnoid, And the pia mater is the one that actually sticks to the substance of the bone, of the brain. And it goes all the way in every fold. And that's how, look at this picture over here. You see this? You see there's a shininess to it. When you peel the meninges here, you're not going to be able to peel the innermost layer, which is your pia mater. So it's that protective. It covers even the innermost. It goes with every fold, which is called a gyrus. It goes inside every fold, and then the second layer on top, and then the third layer. And that's how it tries to protect it. In fact, your meninges, because it's connective tissue. If you look at this, right, at the level of the foramen magnum, which is your skull right here, you know the openings of the brain, the biggest opening is the foramen magnum. I hope you know that by now, okay? So, you see the meninge. What is the basic tissue type of bone? It is, connective tissue, osseous tissue, connective tissue, right? And the main protein here is collagen, remember? And what do you think is the main composition of your membranes? Isn't it collagen also? So, just like the tendon that fuses with the bone, it's the same with the meninges. When it gets to the level of this foramen magnum, you see here this opening right here. So it's, right, the foramen is an opening. So when the meninges gets to that part, this membrane fuses with the substance of the bone. So it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't, it just stays put. And it continues on. So it's just one meninges, okay? But it's continuous, and you call it two names: cranial meninges if it covers the brain, and then spinal meninges if it's covering your spinal cord. But whether it's the brain or the spinal cord, it's just one. It's continuous, okay? So again, in the test, if I ask you if you wrote cranial meninges, spinal meninges, that's just 1 point. They're the same. You just say cranial so that you know it's in the brain part, okay? But it's continuous. And look, as the spinal cord, the nerves come out of your spinal cord. We all know that. So the nerves that we're aware of. When you cut your cat, I want you to look for the sciatic nerve so that you have an idea of how a nerve looks like. But even if, when you trace that, and you're not going to be able to because we don't open the internal yet, but those nerves, you trace it here. When the nerves leave, with it comes a layer of the meninges, because it's like this is your spinal cord, and there's the covering of the meninges. Okay, so let's just look at one nerve. As the nerve comes out, let's say this is your axillary nerve. The meninges, a layer of it goes with it. See? So when you see your nerves, the sciatic nerve, when you see it, it's whitish and it's tough. So that's not the actual nerve. What you will feel, the white tough nerve, is actually inside. What you're feeling is this covering. It's called perineurium, but you have to cut that open to actually see the nerve, which I'm not going to require you, but that's how tough it is, how protective your meninges are. And because of the fact that it's just one continuous meninges, have you heard of meningitis? It is an emergency, isn't it? Because whether it started in the spinal area, spinal meningitis, which is the most common, spinal meningitis, they admit you to the ER right away because it's possible that it will spread. It's connective tissue. It's very vascular, and it spreads fast, right? So people who complain of fever, headache, and then it's called projectile vomiting. So what is the test that you do? Very, very common test. whether, yes, or not before you do spinal tap, just physical exam. You have that when have the patient bend the neck, and they will scream of extreme pain because there's inflammation, and so the space here, you try to squeeze, you try to have the patient bend, you're stretching, it's so painful. Or if they come in, they're laying down, you just lift the leg up and they will experience the same kind of pain, okay? So these meninges, there's 3 layers of them: the dura, the arachnoid, and the pia mater, okay? So the dura mater is the outermost layer. So here's your brain, your skull. This is the dura, which is the outermost layer. This is tough connective tissue. Then there's your arachnoid. And then there's your pia mater. So dura, arachnoid, and your pia mater. So in between these meninges, there are spaces. So above the dura, this is what's referred to as the epidural space. So it's this one right here. Over here, you see, there's your, this is the, there it is, okay? There's your dura mater. So there's the space next to the bone. So this is your bone. There's a space here. You call it epidural space. And then inferior to the dura, between the dura and the arachnoid, you have the subdural. You've heard of epidural bleed, subdural bleed, okay? And then the arachnoid A for avascular. This is where you will find your CSF. In the subarachnoid space is where you find the CSF. Okay? And then the pia mater, this is the one that's, you see, there's the cerebral cortex, there's the brain. This is the one that's stuck to the substance of the brain. So when you say you have a subarachnoid bleed, it must be between the arachnoid and the pia mater. When you say subdural bleed, is between the dura and the arachnoid. Epidural, between the dura and the cranium. Between a subarachnoid, the most common kinds of bleed are what you call subarachnoid bleed and a subdural or epidural bleed. And to determine or differentiate between the two, a patient who suffered from a subarachnoid bleed, they wake up, right? They had a concussion, that's what you call it. A concussion, maybe from contact sports, or they hit their head somewhere, and they wake up, they lost consciousness. Both of them, they will lose consciousness. Then the patient wakes up, and if they recover completely. So that's why when there's any kind of loss of consciousness, don't they keep the patient maybe overnight? Or they can send you home, but they say to the relatives or the loved ones, please watch him for at least 6 hours or for 24 hours. Look for signs of maybe sleepiness or loss of consciousness again. If there's any sign of loss of consciousness or sleepiness, more than likely your bleed was in the subarachnoid space. And that's dangerous, okay? The reason is because it's so close to your brain. So any kind of, they are protective, yes they are, but they're not. They're also subject to being torn and damage. And when they get damaged, they will affect your nervous tissue, your brain. The third type of protection is your blood-brain barrier. You know that, right? You remember the blood-brain barrier? So it makes sense. You see, there's your blood vessel, and then there's your astrocytes that form a protection. And then the fourth will be your CSF, which we're all familiar with how the CSF protects the brain. Okay? So now we're done with the structures that protect our brain. This CSF, by the way, how is CSF formed? And when you open up your brain, I want you to look for this choroid plexuses, okay? If you look at this one later on, you will see, you get the chance. There's a ventricle over there, and you see there's black or dark structures there. That's the blood vessel. That's the choroid plexus. So, in every ventricle, see? Lateral ventricles, choroid plexus, third ventricles, choroid plexus, the fourth ventricles. There is always a choroid plexus is nothing but a capillary or a blood vessel. So you look at, when you open the brain, here when we cut the brain open in half, you will notice that there you go. What you will notice when you cut your brains, there's spaces. And the spaces are called ventricles. Okay, right here in front, the frontal lobe, this is what you call the lateral ventricles, and there's two of them. So that's why the next one right here is called the third ventricle. And then by the medulla, it's the fourth ventricle over here. That's why. So two lateral ventricles right here in the front, and then by the right there, you see it by the midbrain area is the third ventricle. You go down here by the cerebellum, there's another big ventricle there called the fourth ventricle. It's just ventricles, okay? They're all continuous, okay? If you just wrote ventricle, that's okay. If you don't remember, they're all ventricles anyway, okay? But their job, not the job, but this is the site where CSF is actually formed. And do you remember, what is CSF? It is fluid, isn't it? Where did the fluid come from? From your blood. There's no fluid that can enter the body except through your blood, okay? And so, what lines this ventricle, we know that the roof of the ventricle is composed of your ependymal cells, remember? So there's my ependymal cells, see? And adjacent or next to any ependymal cell will be your choroid plexus, right there, your blood vessel, the capillary. So as blood flows here, the plasma of the blood, or the water part, right, it trickles through the ependymal cells. And that is what becomes the CSF. So what is flowing out of this blood? Nutrients, glucose, right, water, everything that your brain needs. That's how it gets its nourishment. That is also, see, look how the CSF flows. The CSF flows from where it's made all the way down, then it goes back up to drain back to your arachnoid villus, the villi, to go back to your vein, go back to the heart, then the heart will circulate it again, then another round. It's just a cycle or a never-ending round. So that's how they get nourishment. That's also how they get rid of metabolic waste products, you see? So that's why, what do you think will push the fluid out here? Do they have legs to move from here to here? No. It's your blood pressure, see? That's why if your blood, isn't this blood? If your blood pressure is down, how can your brain be nourished? It's impossible. See? That's why it's very important to always drink your water and always be adequately hydrated. But even if you forget to drink your water, you remember, or you're going to take that up when you go to Bio 242, your endocrine system
It's beyond your control. God just loves us so much that if we forget to drink water, if we forget to do these things, internally, our body is taking care of it. It's amazing, right? Okay, so now, do you have any questions on the flow of CSF? On the importance of CSF or so in the test, in the lab exam, this is one of my favorites. I always take it out. I just express it out and have a pin right there and have the top exposed, and I ask you to identify it. It's the choroid plexus. You're going to write choroid plexus, and I always ask, what's the function? And then maybe I will ask, give me a consequence if this fails, what it's supposed to do. If it's not able to do it, what is the consequence? So now you can tell me, right? Maybe loss of consciousness can be, right? Or it's not able to drain waste material. So the brain tissue will suffer. So now we're going to look at the different parts of the brain. Are you ready? You have any question on this one? Okay. So we're going to study the brain from down up. Remember that when we look at the brain, we only think that this is the brain, but this is not all of it. The brain begins here. So you will see here, there's a stump over here. The thin stump is the spinal cord. But when you go up, there's a bulge. So where the bulge is, that's the beginning of the brain. So the brain has different parts. The first part of the brain, so here, look at this one. You see? So there's the spinal cord over here. And then there's the bulge. By the way, how is your brain formed? You don't need to know about this, the formation of the brain, but I just want you to see how you were formed when you were a baby, okay? So the nervous tissue, so initially you were just a ball of cells, right? And then it just divides and divides, divide. So as far as the brain part, so you were a ball of cells like this, and then you just continuously divide, and when you divide like that. So this part, the front part, the front part of this part, what do you call this part? The cephalic part of your body. This one will start dividing. So it will start dividing like this. And this is represented by this one. Okay? So when it divides around a cavity. See? It will just keep dividing around a cavity. And the cavity becomes the ventricle. See? There's your nervous tissue, the nervous cells that keep dividing, and they divide around a cavity. This cavity is what becomes your ventricles. See? 1 and 2. And see, as they divide, so first we call them prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon, and then they finally differentiate to form your cerebrum, your diencephalon, then your midbrain, the pons, the medulla, and the cerebellum. Okay? But so again, don't worry about this. It's not going to come out in your test. But what I want you to know is the function of the different parts of the brain. So now, let's look at the first part, which is your medulla, the medulla oblongata. The first bulge, okay? Right here. So this is the first, this one over here. In the test, in the lab exam, if there's a pin and the pin is sticking out that way, and I say identify, I'm asking you to identify the spinal cord. If the pin is sticking out that way, identify, it's the medulla. So so here, that's the stalk, that's the spinal cord.
Here, the bulge, the medulla. Next to medulla, you're right, crossing over of fibers, or that term is called decussation. Meaning crossing over. This is why when you have a right brain problem, your manifestation will be on the left side, and left brain, right side problems, right? Because of the crossing over in the medulla. Next to medulla, also right, cardiovascular and lungs. So heart and lungs. See? This is the part of the brain that controls your heart and your lungs. Are you aware of your heartbeat and your breathing? Are you aware of that? Do you know how much oxygen and how much carbon dioxide is in your blood? Are you aware of your blood pressure? What do you think? Are you aware? What's your blood pressure right now? Do you know that? Must be. So I'm thinking that the function of the medulla is unconscious, right? So it does not stimulate skeletal muscle, so it's involuntary. Okay? Okay. In addition to that one, so here, this one, it's very important, right? It's the one that tells our heart to beat. It's the one that tells you to breathe. Cardiovascular and respiratory center, okay? And here is also the origin of cranial nerves number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 8 to 12. Cranial nerves 8 to 12. That's where you will find the beginnings of those cranial nerves. Eight to 12. Okay, so this is your vestibulocochlear, and that's your hypoglossal. We're going to study the different cranial nerves, but that's where they begin. When you open the brain, a lot of times, so here you see this structure sticking out. You see those, it looks like handles. Those are cranial nerves. You see that? The other cranial nerves, so that's my olfactory, this one here, that's my optic. Those are the two very obvious nerves that you will see in when you open the brain. So here, this is my medulla. I'm sure here I will find the origins of cranial nerve number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's hard to find it. So a lot of times it will just be an aside question. So identify, maybe I'll ask, give me two cranial nerves that come out here, and then how do you test for those cranial nerves, okay? Now let's go up. The next bulge is called the pons. Next to pons, you're going to write bridge. See? It bridges the cerebellum with the rest of the brain. That's why it's called a bridge. And there's your cerebellum. Where's the brain? See? There's my cerebellum. So the function of the pons is to bridge the cerebellum with the rest of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? Next to cerebellum, next to pons, also write lungs. It helps. It modifies respiratory activity. So it helps the medulla. The medulla is really the one who sets your respiratory rate. But how long each breath lasts is controlled by the pons. Okay? Next to pons, also write cranial nerves 5 to 8. So this is where they come out of, 5 to 8. So you see, if they suspect a bleed here or an injury here, how they verify, they test for these cranial nerves. And if they're abnormal, they know for sure that your problem is in your pons. Does it make sense? Okay? Go up. The next part of the brain is called your midbrain. So the best way to see or to observe your midbrain is to open up to pry open. This is the cerebellum, this is the frontal lobe, this is your occipital lobe, there's the cerebellum. The midbrain is, so you open up or separate the cerebellum from the occipital lobe, and the midbrain is over here. There's the midbrain. Okay? I know you can't see. I see it. I'm just kidding. So there's the midbrain over here. You see the bulge over here? So above the cerebellum, you will see it. You see, it's not hard to identify the parts of the brain. In 10 minutes, you identify all of them. Just remembering what they do is what will take about 10 hours, not really 10 hours. But it's not hard. Okay, next to midbrain, you're going to write auditory and visual reflexes. That's the function of your midbrain. You know, when you hear a loud explosion, all the reaction that you do is because you have a working midbrain. Auditory, visual reflexes. Visual, when you see something, like something, just all of those reactions. And all the time, when I get to this part of the lecture, I always remember what happened to me and Lily when she was 2 years old. You know, I gave her a bath, but that night I was so tired, I decided I'm going to take a bath with her. So I got naked, I jumped in the bathtub, she was playing. When she looked up, she said, "Ah!" So you see, that's a visual reflex. Okay. So, okay. So the midbrain, next to midbrain, also write cranial nerve number 3 and 4. So that's where they begin. In the midbrain part. Okay? Then, next, you're gonna write right here, you see you're going to make a, what do you call this? A bracket for the midbrain, pons, and the cerebellum. Midbrain, pons, and medulla. So your midbrain, pons, and medulla, you're going to make a bracket, and you're going to write down, these are the structures that make up what we call the brain stem. Brain stem. It looks like a stem, doesn't it? Look. See? The brain looks like a flower, and there's the stem. That's why you call it brain stem. And then also, you're going to write the word reticular formation. Reticular formation. So, all along the brainstem, there will be scattered nuclei. And they make up what you call the reticular formation. Okay? And the reticular formation is your wakefulness, right? This is what wakes you up in the morning. yes, you heard the alarm clock. You woke up because the reticular formation is working. If the reticular formation is not working, no matter what way they put water, you will not wake up. That's the difference between sleep and coma, right? Sleep is temporary loss of consciousness, and coma is permanent loss of consciousness. See? And look at the location of the brain stem. Let's look at where it is in relation to your head. Right here, it's in the base of the skull, right? So that's why if you notice the terrorists, when they want to kill you, they reach for this part right here, right? That's how they train, that's how they're called. They want to kill, and they just reach for this part, you go in a coma. And because this, and they control the vital heart and breathing. That's the one that controls it. So you're going to be what they call SOL, right? That's terrible. But I know that you've heard of, stories where people went in a coma, then they woke up. I believe in God. But also, there's the headquarters of this reticular formation is in your midbrain. So that, up, doing the ventricle, it's all the way up here. So that's a blessing from it. So all over is reticular formation, but this is the main headquarters right there. And so if that was not affected or if it's still preserved, then there's a good chance that you will wake up. Does it make sense? Because that's where the headquarters is. Okay? If that's the one that's affected, then more than likely you will be a permanent vegetable. Okay? But you see, God is alive, right? My brother went in a coma, and that's where his bleed was, in the midbrain. But now he's awake. So, through prayers. Yes. Okay, so do you have any question for on the reticular activating system? No question? It's the wakefulness. Again, the book, your book, which is one of the very good books, in fact, that the one that also they use at University of Michigan. So it's really a great book, but it's very detailed. So it's too much. So I'm just speaking on, the main things that we look for. If there's a problem, you can see right away. Okay? Don't overwhelm yourselves. The next part of the brain, we're going up, the cerebellum, right here. So it looks like a cauliflower, right? This is the second largest part of the brain, right here. And so I want you to be familiar with the folds of the brain. By the way, the folds of the brain, it's called folia. That's the folds of the brain, folia. And they have so many folds. The cells here, they have a specific name. It's called Purkinje cells. These are the nerve cells. I suspect someone named Purkinje was the one who discovered it. And he says that the dendrites, every neuron here has at least 250,000 dendrites, each neuron. Because the cerebellum is the main, it's the one responsible for fine-tuning our movements. Okay? That's why we're able to gracefully do whatever we want to do, or when you're playing tennis maybe, or basketball, you know where to reach for that ball, right? Or to hit. It's because of the cerebellum. So, who has been drunk? If you've ever been drunk, you know how it feels to have an injury to the cerebellum. It's called ataxia. See? It's just like being intoxicated. you lose your fine movements, your balance. It's the one, see, its location, remember, it's bridged by the pons. It receives a report. So your movement, before you can actually do any, so your brain is the one that will tell your muscle to move. But the cerebellum has a say. The cerebellum will always modify that movement so that the final movement is very, very refined and just smooth. Okay? And please, I look at this white matter of the cerebellum called arbor vitae. Looks like the tree of life, arbor vitae. Okay, next, let's go up. Now we go up. We're going to go to the diencephalon part, diencephalon, which is made up of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. So, right here, this part over here, there's your thalamus, this is your epithalamus over here, and there's your hypothalamus, going to the pituitary gland, okay? So, the first is your hypothalamus. Next to hypothalamus, write H for homeostasis. It's the one that maintains the homeostasis. Look at it, contains your feeding center, your thirst center. So I'm thinking you studied, oh, we didn't study receptors yet, but the hypothalamus is the one that contains receptors that monitor the level of sugar in the blood. So once the sugar level is down, it sends an impulse so that you become hungry. That's why they say, and sugar digestion or carb digestion begins in the mouth, you see. If you chew your food longer, you feel full faster. That's one of the secrets or one of the advice they say for helping to lose weight. You chew longer because here you have amylase that breaks down your fats for glucose. Glucose enters the blood in very short distance to the brain, and you feel full faster because the hypothalamus is the one that monitors that one. Same for thirst. When you wait until you're thirsty, it means you're already dehydrated, right? Because that means it's your hypothalamus telling you you're lacking in water, you drink. So, isn't that, don't you think that's for homeostasis? It also releases these two hormones, which we're going to study more when we take up your endocrine system. Okay? See, regulates also body temperature, just everything homeostasis. Okay? Next is your epithalamus. So you see, PI for pineal gland. So the epithalamus is the location of your pineal gland, which secretes melatonin. So melatonin is your sleeping hormone. So when it's dark, you secrete increasing and increasing levels of melatonin. Then you fall asleep. So that's why people who work night shift, they still get sleepy because it's dark. So we want to make sure all the lights are on. Or if you sleep during the day so you can fall asleep, don't they make sure everything is dark? Because you increase the secretion of this when it's dark. And that's the one that makes you fall asleep. Okay? And when they discovered the function of this one, wasn't it? There was a big craze in the 90s, mid-90s or early 90s about melatonin pills. The secret to youth, because it says when you sleep you feel refreshed, but the side effect was you get sleepy, and it was dangerous when you're driving, all that stuff. Okay.
I think we need a break for 5 minutes, and we finish the brain. So when you're done, just put it here.